Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Avoiding Active Directory Forest Recovery Failures. We've got a great presentation prepared today to talk about AD recovery and why it requires a modern approach to make sure your identities are recovered after cyber attacks. With us today, we have Robert Goebel and Chad Nichols, who I'll be introducing momentarily. Before we get started, if everyone could take a quick moment to follow us on social media. You'll see here on the screen a QR code for each of your favorite social networks. If you take out your phone's camera and scan that little box that looks like a unorganized puzzle, it'll take you directly to our social page. So please like, follow, and share. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is McKenna. I work alongside the Microsoft experts here at Cayosoft. Just a couple housekeeping items to go over before we jump into the presentation. First off, you'll notice your microphones are muted to make sure everybody has that optimal listening experience, but we do encourage you to ask any questions you may have. So depending on how you join today, either in browser or through the app, you'll see a question or chat section in your meeting dashboard. Feel free to drop your questions in there and we'll do our best to answer them. If we run short on time today for questions, we'll reach out to you individually to follow up. While you're in your meeting dashboard, also make sure to check out your handout section. We've included a couple additional resources you can download there and share with your team, including one of our newer case studies that you guys might find really interesting, so make sure to check that out. This session will also be recorded and we'll email you a link in the days following. At the end of the presentation, we'll also be sharing our contact information. So if you have any additional questions or you're watching this on demand, please feel free to reach out. At the end of the presentation, we'll also be drawing one lucky winner of a $100 Amazon gift card. So make sure you stay on the line until then as we draw from the list of those present at that time. Whew, all right. Now that we've got all that taken care of, let's go ahead and jump in. Today, we have the founder of Cayosoft, Robert Goebel. Bob is one of the leading experts in hybrid Active Directory management and recovery. And with more than 25 years in the Microsoft identity industry, he's got a lot of insights to share today. We also have with us Chad Nichols, one of our amazing system engineers here at Cayosoft. And he's actually lived through one of these recoveries, so he'll have some great firsthand takeaways for us. Like I said, both of them have tons of insight and best practices to share, so you guys are in great hands today. So on that note, I'll pass it over to Bob.
Hey, thank you, McKenna. I really appreciate it. Chad, are you with us?
I am.
Awesome. Great. So last chance to get your cameras out if you have a modern cell phone. I know the latest Android and the latest Apple phones. If you just sort of aim your camera at those QR codes, it'll bring up a URL where you can go straight to a page and follow us. So please do that. Not only do we announce new releases, new features, but we also do sort of industry news and things that might directly impact folks that are interested in these topics. So please take a second and get that done. If you are not able to do that at the moment, you can always visit your favorite social site and just search for @Cayosoft on those, and you should be able to find it. So diving straight in, I guess the first series of questions we need to sort of just quickly examine is what in the heck makes Active Directory so important? Why, after all this time, almost 30 years, is it still one of those things that is critical to the operation of business? And it's an important question. And we asked Gartner Group to help us with a survey. And through that survey, we got some interesting answers, which may not surprise you, but it's interesting to actually put it on paper and actually have real world feedback to prove out the idea that Active Directory is still critical. So during this survey that Gartner did for us, we asked 5 questions, and they were allowed to pick in order the 3 most important. And the question was, what are 3 impacts of Microsoft directory failure at your organization? That means complete outage. And we'll start at number 5, loss of intellectual property. So that's customer data, resource information, application information, orders, drawings, whatever it might be. Number 4 was damage to or reputation or to the image of the organization. Number 3 was loss of critical operations data. Number 2 was revenue due to operational outage, meaning they couldn't collect orders or process orders, et cetera. And the number one answer, the most popular answer, was that the organization would just simply stop. So if Active Directory went out, they would not have a business that was functioning. Everything is so intertwined with that Active Directory. And it's because most organizations have used Active Directory as the primary identity and access management solution, meaning everybody who steps in and into the organization and goes to log into their system, they're going to use an Active Directory account. And then when they go to access a resource, whether that's an application, a file, email, whatever, Active Directory is granting access. And so if you take that out, people can't do their job. And Chad actually lived through that, unfortunately, was hit with a ransomware attack. Maybe we can ask him to give us some insight as we go. But that makes, I think, a pretty clear picture on why ransomware is increasing against Active Directory. It's basically a cyber war going on right now, and one of the first things they hit is Active Directory. And I think it also explains why it's so important to make sure that you can make Active Directory resilient so it can bounce back from these things in the least amount of time possible. And unfortunately, you may find yourself, even though you've planned and prepared, having a delay because you might have an operational failure, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the number one answer was the organization ceases to operate if Active Directory goes down. All right, so why is Active Directory still so important? Well, there's a couple other details here I want to just frame this conversation with. First of all, over on the left, that same study that Gartner did on behalf of us, they found that 70% of the Microsoft enterprises, people who have based their network infrastructure around Microsoft, 70% of those enterprises are in what we call hybrid mode, meaning they've extended Active Directory's influence to the cloud also. So the people that are coming to work are still logging into on-premise Active Directory, and then they're being provided access to the cloud resources through that initial login or initial authentication. So we mentioned that 70% of enterprises are in this hybrid mode, but Active Directory still remains the number one way people log in for businesses, for large enterprises. And so because it's the number one way people are doing their logins, it's also the number one thing that's being attacked to cause as much pain and inflict as much damage on the organization, typically in a ransomware scenario. So shut them down, ask for money, and move on once they pay or don't pay. A lot of organizations now are refusing to negotiate in these situations, in ransomware situations. So if they get hit, they have to have an alternate way to get back because their policy is not to pay ransom. A lot of the ransomware folks have gotten, the attackers, the bad actors have gotten smart. They're also researching the organizations they're attacking to look for the people who have the biggest insurance. And sometimes the insurance companies aren't paying it. So you may not be able to pay for the ransomware if you decide to do that. And again, the target's Active Directory because it's one of the most important points within the IT chain of identity and access. And it really represents the keys to your kingdom. And it's mission critical, and it absolutely has to be reliable and resilient, meaning it can take a beating and still come back and operate. And when your Active Directory is down, just consider your organization being down. Chad, when you guys got hit with a cyber attack, how many people still were able to do their jobs? Was there anybody within the organization that was able to continue? Do you have people in the mailroom that could keep doing things, sorting mail, those types of things? And what percentage was that?
Maybe 30% of the business could still function, and that's only because where I worked was a manufacturing operation, so we still had places that could still build things and put things together. But from a central office standpoint and everything that interconnects all that, we were completely down, 100%. And another thing I want to add too is what a lot of people may or may not realize is once AD is down for a certain period of time, your synchronization to Azure stops. And once that stops for a certain period of time, Microsoft no longer lets you even log into the cloud with those synced accounts. So that's something to be aware of as well. So it literally does truly take your entire organization down, even the cloud after a certain period of time.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to protect it. So let's take a look at this, really what happened. So Chad, I think you first mentioned this to me, that there's sort of a best case operational order if you do get hit with ransomware. By the way, there's a little snapshot of what it may look like if you get hit with ransomware on the right over there. They've encrypted everything and now you're getting the message you need to pay. But in a hybrid Active Directory environment, you really, if you think about providing access to network resources, it's identities and access. And without the identities, you can't allow a system to control access. So you have to bring the identities back first, get the user accounts working, get people able to log in, and then come in second with the applications and resources that are out on the network that may have also been a victim of the ransomware. You really want to keep the latency or the delay between when the hit occurs as low as possible till the time those logins are working again. It may be some time to get those other systems back. There could be issues with the way your traditional backup vendor works and may not be able to help you there. And there are only a couple of vendors that can do these full forest recoveries. And we're going to talk about that next and discuss the differences between those vendors. So, Chad, I want you to chime in here. So why don't my existing vendors work with recovering Active Directory? They all say they recover Active Directory, but Metallic, Veeam, Commvault, they all are telling me, hey, I can restore your Active Directory. But why does that not necessarily work?
Yeah, there's multitude of things, right? First off, there is the potential that they could reintroduce the OS, which then also could reintroduce the ransomware virus itself. And a lot of people have the understanding that, hey, somebody gets an email today, they click on that email, it opens up, and then it just automatically infects my environment. But really, that's not the way it works. Bad guys come in and stay in the environment for 90 plus days to really learn your environment. So when they write that virus, it's targeted to you and is going to be super efficient. Took down my worldwide organization in a couple hours. So
Yeah.
They're really good at what they do. So you want to make sure that when you do that recovery, it's not going to reintroduce that. And most of the bare metal solutions and the traditional software solutions, they do bring back the OS as well. And then you do definitely have that possibility. And where we had ours, I didn't have this type of solution myself, the Cayosoft solution. And so I had that same problem, right? So we had to do a lot of extra due diligence just to make sure that we weren't reinfecting the environment. And then on top of that, there's a ton of manual steps that you have to do if you are using legacy tools that you have to step through as part of the Microsoft official documentation.
Which are also a nightmare, right?
Yes, exactly. It's all manual.
Speaking of manual, let's talk about what Microsoft does for forest recovery. And it's important to understand, Microsoft built Active Directory on premise. They have built Azure Active Directory. They have produced the synchronization tool, which extends the on-premise directory to have its influence also in the cloud. So, of course, they provide absolutely nothing other than some guidance on those manual steps that you might have to do should you have an outage. Now, again, what we were just describing is the traditional backup and recovery vendors are usually doing snapshot or VM-based or server-based backups, which include the operating system, which we would consider unclean backups, because if you restore the server with the operating system, as Chad pointed out, it brings back the infection. Well, yeah, if you're lucky and you have one domain controller left, you can start the manual process. But again, you have to have some source of the data. If you don't have a backup or a DC, you're kind of stuck anyway. But here's the guidance, and this is super complex. Chad, you've looked through this. It's what, 35, 40 pages of just, explaining different areas, something like that, something crazy.
Yep.
You can go to Microsoft's documentation or just go to Microsoft and search for AD Forest Recovery, and they show you this. But this is an example of the types of tasks that need to be completed. Some of these seem pretty simple, but there's some in here that are really, really pretty difficult, as Chad was mentioning, of these extra manual steps. It's time consuming. Every second that you're trying to do this recovery, the business is out of business. It's completely shut down. You're losing orders. You're losing your reputation. And so an event that causes you to have to go into recovery mode is the worst time to have to learn this. So you're going to have to go out ahead of time and understand this and prepare yourself. So no matter what, you can't get away without preparing. Whether you're buying a third-party tool from somebody like us, or you're you're going to go get it from Microsoft's guidance and try to do it yourself. You have to have things up front. Otherwise, you're just going to completely fail because you haven't done the bare minimum to even survive to have a chance to do the recovery. One other thing I'm going to mention here is that in addition to the pre-planning it takes, a lot of people that recover manually, it's just by sheer luck. You have one extra DC domain controller that's available because it was either offline temporarily or was having some other issue, or you managed to unplug that port on the server or on the switch before it got hit. But I wouldn't rely on those. So again, pre-planning for these things, all that stuff has to be done. You have to have one domain controller from each domain in the forest, and it just gets to be very, very ugly. If you're doing it manually, it's also difficult to test. How are you going to test it? Great question. There are some consultants that I've talked to who believe that because Microsoft provides guidance, that you should only be using their guidance. And so I've seen a couple of individuals go out and write these elaborate scripts that help sort of automate this. And that's great. They can do that. Again, it's scripting. Somebody's got to maintain it, and typically they're the only ones that can maintain it. So now you're stuck beholden to them, for this ongoing, never-ending consultant gig. So just be aware, it's very complex. So who has done this? Good case study, Maersk, the largest shipping company. You'll see their shipping containers not only on ships, but on the back of trucks going around the US and around the world. They lost 55,000 devices in 7 minutes to a ransomware attack. They had one domain controller left that had survived the attack. All of their 1,200 applications that were integrated with Active Directory became offline. It took them 9 days just to recover the identities to a point where they could have people logging in. That's 9 days. That's over a week just to get the sign-ins working. Then they were also working on returning those 1,200 applications to a usable state. The write-off in their report afterwards showed a $350 million loss because of this, and a big portion of that was just the time it took to recover. It's not funny, but it's interesting. The CIO had to sleep in the office 70 days straight for the recovery to be ended. So the first 9 days was just Active Directory. Then they had additional work to bring back everything else. That's a lot. So we've talked about manual recovery. We hinted at the fact that there are other tools out there. You can get somebody to script it, and there are third-party tools. My belief is you probably aren't going to be able to do this without a third-party tool easily. Otherwise, you're going to have these massive losses and take a lot of time to accomplish this. So let's talk about forest recovery and how we got here today. So we've been talking about forest recovery. There are tools out there that do it. Let's talk about these tools to give you some history and how we got here, and then talk about what's changed recently in these legacy tools that allows a lot of the problems with them that causes failure of recovery to be overcome. What a great company this little company was. It was called Ileta Software, started in Columbus, Ohio. Both myself and my co-founder worked at Ileta. I started in 2002. I think he started in 99, if I remember correctly. They were a tools company that built software solutions for the Microsoft management stack. They started with Windows NT products. NT retired and became Active Directory, and they continued on. And one of their very first and extremely popular tools was just Active Directory data recovery. So somebody accidentally deleted an organizational unit with 2,000 users in it. They had a tool that would allow you to take a backup every night, and then from that backup, find the deleted OU, with a graphical user interface. You just point and click and restore it. What a great tool. Prior to that, you had to reboot, take a domain controller offline, reboot it into safe mode and have an authoritative restore done. It's actually Active Directory recovery mode, I think is what it was called. And during that process, you did a lot of sort of scripting, and actually it was more of just understanding the syntax and how you tried to bring things back out of the recycle bin. Well, it was deleted items container back then. And it was kind of a really ugly process, and you didn't get all the data back. You did get the objects back and their IDs, which was critical, but not everything. And so they invented this solution just to get to the data and recover it easily without having to go through an authoritative restore. So what would take you a couple of hours to do potentially with an authoritative restore, you could do in 20 or 30 minutes if somebody deleted an OU or deleted a bunch of users, because they had that ability to back up the data and then use that backup to recover the objects. Well, I happened to be in an office that was right next to the support team for Alita. And I had one of the support guys walk into my office one day and said, "Hey, a customer that you've been talking to the last couple of days, they have a problem. Can you come share your experience?" They had that recovery tool, the data recovery tool. And they had a bigger problem. They had a data corruption, and it corrupted their Active Directory. And for some reason, they had a couple of domain controllers that were still available, but most of them were taken out. And so the support team, along with the development team, came up with a very manual process to recover their forest. Now, their forest was actually pretty simple. It was a single domain, but it involved reinstalling operating systems onto new machines and then overwriting those in restore mode. And it was really a lengthy process, and it was effectively the same or similar steps that you needed to do per the Microsoft guidance. But there was a lot going on there. And from that experience, the Alita team really realized that there was a need, if your entire directory was taken out, to help people recover that. And so there were two additional solutions that were built, two separate products built to facilitate bringing back individual domain controllers if you have a catastrophe there, or bringing back the forest. And that really made a difference. So those three separate tools would allow you to pretty much do what you needed to do to recover in most critical scenarios. Now, in 2004, that company was acquired by another company called Quest Software. And so Alita became Quest, and they have done very, very well with their recovery tools for Active Directory, but they're still first generation. We would consider those legacy tools. And then somewhere around 2013, 2014, 2015, a derivative of their recovery tool, something that pretty much operated the same way, showed up with a company named Simperis. And again, a very good forest recovery tool. At Cayosoft, having experience in this space, we decided we wanted to move on into recovery. And so we realized that there were still a lot of problems that could cause issues when you're trying to do this recovery. And so we now have built our own separate forest recovery solution, but it does some things a little bit different. So first of all, we didn't want two or three products. That couldn't be. You had to have one that is unified between the data recovery, which is bringing back deleted items and things like group memberships or attribute data, and the forest recovery tool. You wanted one solution for everything. So that was our design goal, and we wanted to make sure that that single solution was also hybrid ready and cloud ready. So we didn't just build it for on-premise. We built it to not only recover AD, but also Azure AD and all the interconnections between Azure AD and the on-premise directory if you're running in hybrid mode. And so we also realized there's some legacy recovery modes that we wanted to, like bringing back a domain controller. That is what it is. You don't need anything special to do that. It's just bringing back a particular machine. And so we built our own solution, but it uses something a little bit different called a standby forest recovery as its primary recovery method for forest recovery. Now we do the legacy mode, and we'll explain the legacy mode here in a moment, but we definitely do a full-blown standby forest mode, which is what we consider a better method for doing these forced recoveries, and avoids all the pitfalls that you could have for doing it the old legacy way. So let's talk about why legacy recoveries fail. It's an important piece to understand, and it primarily revolves around the fact that it's built to be used in an emergency, and you want to try and create resilience, which means you don't want to just react in an emergency. You probably want to do one step better. So the legacy process of recovery is pretty simple. You make backups of your domain controllers. And all three of the vendors out there, including us, do what we call a clean backup, meaning we only take the components of Active Directory that we need, and we leave the operating system behind, right? We don't want the operating system because that's where the ransomware is active and running. Now, it could be also other types of ransomware hidden inside of Active Directory. So, we scan for those things to make sure that there's, not an application hidden that's going to be triggered somehow within the directory itself. But we're basically backing up the directory data and the configuration so that we can reconstruct that later on. Then we do a manual, this is the legacy mode, right? We do a manual construction of an isolated network. So it's a separate collision domain. And the reason we do that is because if we are restoring domain controllers, right, we want to have the same names, if possible, the same IP addresses, the same DNS entries, so that when those machines are now used, everything still continues to work the way it did before, minus the ransomware, right? That's the idea. Then you have to go out and prepare a bunch of servers. A lot of people will want to use physical servers, because they don't really have an alternative. And so if you're in that mode, you have, let's say you have, 50 domain controllers in your environment. You have 5 domains. You need a minimum of probably 6 domain controllers. You're gonna have 6 servers sitting there, or 6 VMs dedicated to accepting the backups in a recovery. And so there's a cost associated with that, both in terms of licensing or the hardware that's running the electricity, but also you have to keep those things up to date. There could be a change in Windows Server that potentially would impact your backups and make them not viable. So we got to make sure that that's constantly checked. And again, that's a whole manual process you have to go through. And then they're sitting there waiting, right? So then you wait for the outage, and then the outage occurs, and you're called into the office. Your hair is on fire because the entire business, the management's screaming, hey, we're offline. The users are screaming, hey, I can't log in and access my TPS report. Everybody's upset. So now it's up to you with all that pressure to recover the directory. So my argument for legacy recovery, the biggest number one problem with doing legacy recovery, is that you do the recovery when your hair is on fire, when the outage has occurred. Probably the worst time to have to do a recovery possible. And then the longer it takes, the more pressure. And unfortunately, because these processes are so complex, you only get to test this once, twice, 3 times a year. And so any change in the process, new updates to the operating system, new applications you put on your DCs, all that could potentially have an impact. And it's still just a really complex process. So you bring up another domain, oops, I got to now go create new VMs, and I have to, do this and do that. If I don't do everything perfectly, I can have, disruptions in my production, because I may have machines named the same thing, one in the recovery lab that I've spent all this time building and one that's in production. So you just have to be conscious of the fact that it's a complex environment, and it doesn't really help. So how do these things fail? Well, the setup can be complex, so the odds that you miss something go up. And because of the complexity and the nature of the traditional or legacy recovery, you don't get to test it that much. So part of our work with Gartner was also to ask how frequently we tested. And more than 50% of the respondents said they didn't test enough. I think it was 45% roughly said that they should be tested, they should test their recovery quarterly, but less than a quarter actually were doing that. Everybody else was doing it twice a year or once a year, and a lot of people didn't test it at all. Recovery servers have to sit out there. Chad, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just from my own personal experience too, what you'll find, or what happened with me is, we did a full true DR test one time, and then budgetary things came into play. So now we're not going to do, physical things. So now it's going to become a tabletop exercise. So now you've really, limited yourself to how you test. And like you said, there's a lot of places that don't even know they should test.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing, to say the least.
Right. So you have these recovery servers out there, which you hope are going to work, right? Because you haven't tested them, well, maybe you did last June, and here it is December. You're hoping the backups are good, because without testing the backups, you don't actually know if they're good. And then you're under all this pressure, and when you try to do the recovery, I hope it recovers. And you don't know if the recovery is going to work until you finish the recovery. That is a frightening proposition, especially in the day where everybody's under increased scrutiny on security and business agility and resilience to these types of things. You don't know it's going to recover until you actually have to do a recovery. That's the scariest part. Now, what is the alternative? So when we looked at producing a recovery tool, as a startup, we want to be competitive. And so we started really looking at what has changed since 2004, 2005, since those days back in the Alita office when this whole ugly mess and software solutions got started. And I realized in working with my co-founder that the number one thing is you want to make sure it's going to work. So you don't want to wait until you get hit with the virus to make sure it works. And the second most important thing is you want to recover as fast as possible so that your agility and your resilience in the business is intact. Because if you can do those two things, then nothing else really is going to cause you an issue. So how do we make sure that the recovery worked before I get hit with ransomware or an outage? And how do I minimize the amount of time? Well, our answer was let's pre-recover. What does that mean? Well, the technique we call standby forests. This is patent pending technology that we've developed, and it really leverages the fact that most organizations, like 90%, have now some cloud resource that they can use that they didn't have prior to this. And so let me walk you through the difference in the process between a traditional forest recovery and what we call an instant forest recovery, using what we also call as a standby directory or a set of standby directories. So let's look at the slight difference in the process here. So it starts off the same. We do this, what we call a clean backup, getting just the components of Active Directory off of the domain controllers that you choose, just same as a traditional backup. And then everything's different from here. We do have what we call a recovery plan. Most of the other solutions do as well, to walk you through the process of picking the domain controllers. And in their case, you pick the physical machines or the VMs that you're going to target. It's sort of a one-to-one targeting for the DCs. We don't cause you to do that or force you to do that. We have all the data we need to regenerate those. But the difference is, while we do support the ability to map, hey, this is my primary domain controller, it's going to go to that VM here, and the second one's going to go to the next VM, and so on. So while we do support all that traditional sort of stuff, legacy stuff, we also support what we call isolated recovery networks that are automatically created with the DCs in them that you need. So the idea is you create and schedule, maybe in 2 steps, what we call a recovery plan, and it's actually like a job. It's like a batch job. And so it automatically is going to create an isolated network in the cloud, either on Amazon, which we're just about to launch support for, or currently it's Azure Active Directory, Azure. And then it builds virtual machines for all your domain controllers. So now you have an isolated network automatically created, and you have all of the DCs in them. And then we start all those DCs after we've constructed them. So you know that the forest is going to be available. So when you're in good shape and you have a production forest that's working, you continue to have people logging into your production forest, and we're taking these backups, these clean backups, and we can construct a recovery environment that's ready for you anytime you need it. And most people that are, work with a business, that's of any size, maybe more than 25 users, have an express route connection or some other high-speed connection that's integrated into their network on premise, and then integrated on the Azure side with Azure. So this is an isolated network, so you're not going to have conflicts between IP addresses or machine names. It'll be self-contained at that point. And the beautiful part about it is you can do this with Monday and have a forest that you can use on Monday. You could do it on Thursday. You can have these multiple forests created. And if you do have a problem, then you can pick the one that is most likely to give you the best result. Now, what's the next step? So this is the good working part, right? All of this is automatic. You just have to pick your DCs and sort of have a little understanding in your environment, make sure the firewalls and all those other networking things are set to allow us to work. Very simple process there. Our guys can help you with that. So then you get hit for an outage. So you just have this thing running and you wait for an outage. And when it happens, you don't recover. You just change your network routing. That's it. You take the user login traffic that was going to your on-premise production forest and you reroute it to the isolated recovery forest. So it's literally just an update to a routing table, and you could probably script that really easily. Now, you want to make sure everything's ahead of time is set up and working. Those machines that are in your production forest, those all need to be shut down, but they're now ready to have the FBI or whoever's going to come in, local law enforcement, to examine the attack and figure out what actually broke. But all your users are back up and working. Now, you may have your application servers. Now, this is where Veeam and Metallic and all those guys come in to help you recover those apps. But at least your identities are going to continue to work. And there's some additional benefits that you can get out of this as well. So, for example, let's say you detect, Chad, you mentioned the folks that hit you were in the environment for a while, plotting and planning before they carried out the attack. Let's say, for example, you detected that that was happening. Well, you could recover the forest, do this recovery, and then remove whatever they've done, undo what they've done in the recovery forest, and then just switch over. The other one's still working, but switch over, get the login traffic going to the recovery forest, and then shut down the production forest and stop them in their tracks. So this gives you a multiple options here as well. And we do support multiple recovery plans. So you could even use this process to create a lab to test applications before you roll them out. So you can do your dev, test, prod much, much easier, and it'll be a true clone of the existing environment, up to date whenever you think you're going to need it. So this makes it simple and easy. You drop in the solution. It's going to help you pick the DCs. It'll auto-discover them. Then you can just choose the ones you think are most important. It's going to do automation around the whole recovery process. We use those clean backups that we mentioned, just like you would with a traditional forest recovery. But then we also provide this new fault-tolerant directory, which we call instant recovery. And so you don't have your hair on fire trying to start a recovery and then hoping it's going to work. You already know it worked because we've recovered this forest maybe 2 times a week. And by the way, we also will destroy the forests too. So if you have, let's say, 2 recovery forests set up, 2 separate isolated recovery forests, you go to create a third one. Once that's created, we can actually go tear down the first one. So you're not maintaining a bunch of servers. Now, what we're finding is that some vendors, like Microsoft, will give you a grace period on VMs. And so you may not even be paying for those. It just depends on how your account's set up and what your features are. So there may be no initial cost until you actually do the recovery, at which point you're going to want to keep those domain controllers, right? Once that's done, then you have the option of keeping those. So it pretty much, because of the constant backup and constant recovery, lets you know that the recovery is going to work each and every time. There's really no question any longer whether you're going to be able to recover from a ransomware or a wiperware attack or a corruption of the directory. So let's give you a couple best practices for resilience. What the heck is resilience? Resilience is the ability to take a blow, to bend when that happens, and then recover from it right away, rather than just breaking and then having to go through some process to try and get back. Keep in mind though, when you're doing directory data recovery, that is different from forest recovery. Again, we have all that built into a single tool. With other vendors, you're gonna have to buy a couple of different tools, each at their own expense. And Microsoft Recycle Bins have nothing to do with either of these. Microsoft Recycle Bins on premise and in the cloud are just undelete. That's all they are. They get the objects back, but they don't necessarily recover data. So if somebody wrote a script just to empty all your groups, Recycle Bins aren't going to help. If your forest goes out, Recycle Bin goes along with it, they're not going to help. Always be prepared for when your next outage is going to occur, whether that's because a low-level outage with data, somebody deleted a group or updated the membership incorrectly. That can cause an outage because people can't access an application. And also the forest outage. You got to prepare. Third-party solutions are the absolute best way to do this. They're going to save you a lot in terms of complexity and actual costs to maintain a solution moving forward. And make sure it's built for hybrid. Some of the other solutions out there don't really respect hybrid, and then you're going to have problems with objects being out of sync or having issues that corrupt the process of using your hybrid environment. Again, I want to point out the difference between recovery and resilience. Recovery is an activity that you perform during an emergency. There are two types: bringing back Active Directory data or Azure Active Directory data, and then a full directory recovery. Resilience is a strategy to withstand and instantly recover if needed. So if, for example, you do get hit with wiperware, you want to have a fault tolerant system to fail over to rather than have to do a full recovery, right? That's why we call it instant recovery and not just directory recovery. Chad, would you mind just sort of pointing out the points to what an instant recovery looks like? I think that would be great to actually see it.
Sure. Yeah, I can give you the 2-minute take. All right, so I'll just start real fast. I don't have a really complex environment. I got 4 domain controllers: a parent domain, child domain. And just so you guys see kind of what's here in my original configuration, here's my sites and services. So you can see my 4 DCs. Pretty straightforward. DNS, same thing. You'll see my 4 DCs here, their IP addresses in DNS, and then also in the MSDCS, which is very important, of course, for Active Directory replication. And then here's some data that's in my directory. I have users and groups and standard stuff, nothing too complex. So here's kind of a look at my original data. So now if I switch over to Cayosoft Guardian, I will go ahead and just show you guys, like Bob mentioned, it's very, very easy set up. I have a backup plan. I actually have a couple backup plans because I have a separate forest and I back that up as well. But this backup plan backs up my 4 DCs on a daily basis. As you can see, it just kind of runs and chugs along and does its thing.
So your setup is for multi-forest is what you were saying, right? I didn't want that to slip. Yeah, okay.
Yep,
cool.
I am. So yeah, we can do multi-forest, we can do multi-domain, we can do single domain, really whatever is necessary we can support. Then from a recovery plan perspective, I created the standby forest recovery plan and actually pre-ran that before we got on here, because that does take a little bit of time and we don't really want to sit around and wait for that. But this was successful. And so what it did is it built my environment in Azure, just like Bob said. So here's my DCs. And one thing to note, the default for the recovery is to do 1 domain controller in each domain. And that's just for speed, right? Get that back up, because if you're in an outage situation, you want to be a backup as quickly as possible. You don't necessarily need all of your DCs recovered to do that, because you can always build those out the old-fashioned way. So I have 1 child DC and 1 main DC. Go ahead and just do a quick login here. And this is the first time I've logged in. So Cross your fingers, but I've done this many times, so I'm pretty confident that, again, this is going to work because I've done a lot of testing and have pretty good confidence level. We're going to be good here.
And
So
when
that,
it did its restore on the schedule or whatever you ran, you didn't get an error, right? So it's up and
exactly,
running already.
yes,
Yeah, that's the key.
successful, and yes, it went through, did the due diligence checks and everything.
Right.
At least from a recovery standpoint, is good. My last backups were good, so yes.
One thing I want to point out is that when Chad was showing and you don't have to go back and do this now, but Chad was showing the recovery plan that can be scheduled, and you can have one on Monday, one on Wednesday, and one on Friday if you wanted to. So each time it runs, it's automatically being tested again, right? You don't have to go necessarily log in. We would error report if something happened, but you have multiple forests then to choose from. And again, because of the way VMs are working in the cloud, it's likely you won't be actually charged for that until you go out and actually have to do a failover, and you pick one that you're going to make permanent. Oh, there's the environment. Look at that.
Yeah, and one of the things I kind of do visually for my test is I have a group policy that sits my background for me. So the fact that this has been set, and I see the ocean over which I'd love to be playing in right now, but unfortunately I'm working. I see that, so that tells me group policy is working. And now it's just really going in and taking a look and seeing that things have been recovered. One thing that we do for you that I really, really applauded our developers with is if you do not recover all of your domain controllers, we automatically clean up the metadata for the ones not recovered. I had to do that for almost 130 domain controllers manually in my outage. And so this would have saved me a ton of time, not to mention the fact that, I'm a human, so I probably forgot things. But this was all done for me. So notice I only did the DC ones, and now that's all that exists. And that goes for the sites and services, that goes for my MSDCS, so notice only the DC ones here. For regular DNS, only the DC ones here. We have updated the IP information for the domain controllers that were recovered. So that's done automatically. Everything else has been left alone because, as you come back from your outage, you're going to have to come up with a new IP scheme for that anyway. And then just finally, here's my list of groups that
So
we
I brought
saw.
everybody back. That's awesome.
Yeah. So AD is fully restored, functioning, and this was on a brand new OS. So brand new
that's something
server
else.
template from Microsoft.
Yeah, we probably should mention that we make sure that during the recovery process that we've collected enough information about your source domain controllers to accurately represent them, even if it's a different level of the operating system or different version of the operating system, we still configure it the way it's needed. So great. There are more extensive demonstrations that go through the details that Chad's sort of going through just quickly. So if you are interested in that, check out cayosoft.com, go to our resource library, and you'll find them there. Chad, thank you very much for that. That was pretty awesome.
Yep,
I
no
really
problem.
appreciate it. So I'm going to jump back to my screen here, and we'll start to close up. Forest recovery, Active Directory object and attribute, or I call it Active Directory data recovery, change monitoring, threat detection, delegation, and automation of day-to-day administrative tasks are all within the realm of solutions that Cayosoft provides. And to sum that up, I would simply say we manage, monitor, and recover your Microsoft critical platforms. We traditionally do this for an enterprise. So if you're a 25 user company, we're probably a little more than you need. If you're 500 and up employees in your company, then we're probably likely going to be able to help you pretty easily. Our customers range from about 500 users on the small side to over 1 million employees globally. And we have been doing this for quite a long time. And our primary difference is that we look at the existing solutions that have been out there and try to figure out how we're going to improve them. We also build everything with hybrid and cloud in mind. So for example, with our management solution, you can manage both on-premise, you can manage in hybrid mode, or you can manage in cloud-only mode. Same with change monitoring and same with recovery. You can recover Active Directory on-premise or you can recover Azure AD. It doesn't really make a difference to us how you configure the tool. They're just built to work in all three of those modes. So if you need additional solutions beyond recovery, you want change auditing, for example, we provide that as well. Take a look at us, and we're happy to answer any questions, give you a demo, or if you're interested in just sort of what these solutions cost, you can hit our website, and there's a link for that as well. Now I'm going to ask McKenna to drop back in and close us up.
Perfect. All right. So that concludes our presentation today. We'd like to thank everyone for their time and hope you enjoyed the webinar. At this time, we'll go ahead and take attendance for the gift card drawing, and we will email the winner directly to get more information about that card for you. You'll also see, as Bob mentioned, a few quick links for the Cayosoft website. Should you have any additional questions, you can visit cayosoft.com/question. If you'd like to schedule a personalized demo or get a free trial, you'll see those links here as well. We also have another QR code here on the screen for you. Again, scan it with your phone's camera. It'll take you straight to our demo request page. And of course, for more information about Cayosoft and our solutions, feel free to visit cayosoft.com. Again, thank you so much for your time, and everyone have a great day.